Yellow. Hopefully everybody can hear me. If you could turn on your cameras just to wave hi. Yes, no, maybe so. Anyone can hear me? Give me a thumbs up. I see a few people logged in.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you so much. We're going to get started very shortly. Welcome, everyone. We're about to get started. I'm about to start sharing the slide. And give me a thumbs up if you can see the slide. I got to find where the chat is also. Yep, in the chat, you can drop it in the chat if you can see the slide. Let me know everything is visible and we will be getting started. There we go. I see someone. All right. All right, we're going to get our session started. Looks like we have a few people in. I can't get a count here because my screen is overtaken by the Zoom slide, but it looks like everyone should be able to see my deck. I'll be switching in and out of this deck mode so that I can at least talk to you all about a few use cases or case studies that we'll be talking about today. And we're focusing on crushing the technical interview. And I'm going to be your host today. My name is Bobby Dorless, and I'll get more details into who I am very shortly. Now that I switched that mode off, now my slide disappeared. And let me get that back real quick. So today's conversation about crushing the technical interview, we're going to review a few topics here, primarily just focusing on some of the things that I've observed over the years as an interviewer for a few known tech companies. And ultimately, there may be concepts or, how can I say, things that you already know. What I want you to note is if you hear me say something that you already know or have already heard before, this means that you need to double down on that specifically. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about, I'm going to give you a quick introduction myself, and then we're going to review some tips and strategies to crush technical interviews. It's going to be a question answer section at the end. So if you do have some questions, hold them off until the end. Definitely drop them in the chat room. And I'll have somebody, if someone volunteers to help me out with the chat room afterwards. But in general, I want you all to ask any questions that you have at the end. And definitely, I'm focusing on giving you the insightful view on how to crush technical interviews. Now, who am I? My name is Bobby Dorless, and I'm one of the career coaches here specifically for the technical interviewing side. I've been in the field of engineering for almost 20 years now. I just wrapped up a lengthy career working for a really cool social media company called Twitter. Definitely always open to have conversations about working there, and definitely the skill sets that I've seen over the years of engineers that I've interviewed at Twitter. So definitely feel free to reach out and we can chat more about it. And if you have questions about that, we can wait until the end, then we can hash those out too. But more specifically about my technical skills are what programming languages do I enjoy writing in? The reason why I like to bring this up is that I want you all to also always be prepared to talk about things that you're most proficient at. Programming languages is a definitely great icebreaker for most people because if we write in the same programming languages, we basically speak the same language per se. So my preferred programming languages are Python, Golang, and Bash. If you're not familiar with Bash, that's what you type in a terminal. It is a programming language. A lot of people don't know that, but in general, it's one of those programming languages as a resource for me because I'm proficient at systems engineering, but I'm also a software engineer. We can talk more about my skills afterwards, but definitely keep this in mind when you're talking about yourself, is to always talk about coding languages or things that you're most proficient at in this field of technology and engineering. Now, today's conversation about crushing the technical interview. Before we even get started, and I need some participation here, and the chat room in Zoom, you should be able to find the chat room icon not too far from the screen that you're looking at, but let me know how many of you all have actually had a technical interview. Now, this is either conversations with a recruiter, conversation with a hiring manager, or actually conversation with technical engineers on the team that you're applying for. So I'm waiting for at least a few people to mention it inside the chat. How many technical interviews have you attended so far? All right, we got one person, 1-0. One person has 2 to 3. Anyone else? All right, all right. We definitely have people that have attended technical interviewing. And I hope that the experience itself definitely gives you an insightfulness on the different ways that we review candidates' capabilities and where they're at in their journey in terms of technology and engineering. This topic here about crushing a technical interview is something that I want you all to take with you as a resource for you to continue to practice and be prepared for interviewing. The reason why I ask how many interviews have you attended, because one of the key things about crushing a technical interview is having more interviews or interviewing more. Now, the next question is, how many people have attended mock interviewing? So if you haven't done an actual technical interview, how many mock interviews have you done? If we could throw some numbers in there, let me know how many. There we go. We got some people that done 3 mock interviews, 2 mock interviews. Great, great. Now, remember, mock interviewing is the same thing as actually interviewing. The reason why I'm bringing up mock interview as a mechanism for you to practice or to actually, get those repetitions in for interviewing is the way that you go into mock interviewing and practicing for mock interviewing is the same way that you're going to be when you actually interview. So if you're not getting access to actual companies that are interviewing you, mock interviewing is a great resource so that you can get those repetition in. Remember, the more you do, the more proficient you're going to be, the more relaxed you're going to be. And then the conversations themselves, they're just going to be conversations rather than being interviewed. Now, back to our slide deck here when we're talking about crushing a tech interview. I was about to make a comment about something about interviewing, and I want to make sure I emphasize this, at least with this slide here, is that interviewing is not an interrogation. It's a conversation. It's a conversation between 2 individuals that are debating on topics of engineering and technology, hopefully showcasing your skill sets as the candidate at the proficient level that they're looking for. Now, one thing that I want to do in this presentation today is talk about a few case studies and specifically give you some scenarios of me going through interviews, interviews that I was successful at or interviews that I was not successful at. And then we'll have some takeaways afterwards. Now, this case study is more or less just talking to you about what the process was for me at certain companies of getting interviews and going through the interview process and eventually getting the result of, hey, I got hired or I did not get hired. So this first case study that I'm going to talk about is really just going to enlighten you on the process that it takes for you to get hired for a company called Citrix Systems. Is a company I used to work for. Now, when I first got my phone call from Citrix Systems, actually, I'll take 2 steps back. The first way that I engage this company called Citrix Systems is applying for a job on their website and more or less applying for as many jobs as I could on their website. The reason why I'm bringing this up is that I want you to also be active in looking for opportunities, not only at job fairs, career fairs, or some organized events. I want you to start researching sites and they're researching companies and looking on their sites for the job opportunities that you're looking for. and not just looking, but applying for them. The thing about Citrix, which I'm bringing up in the story, is that I didn't know that I wanted to work for them. I was just browsing their website, looking for a blog post on something else. And I said, hey, let me go and check out their career site. As soon as I clicked on the career site, all of these opportunities that align with my skill set were open. And I was like, hey, why don't I just apply and see what happens? And the cool thing about that is that there is no real feeling of, oh my gosh, I got to get this job. This is more or less just shoot my shot to see if it goes in. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And what happened is that actually I got somebody on the hook because a recruiter contacted me within a week or two later. Now, one thing that I was not prepared for when the recruiter contacted me was to actually have that conversation, because I actually forgot about the process of me applying for that position. Now, there's really no tips or strategy here in terms of remembering how many jobs you apply for, because I hope you're applying for as many as you can. But the true tip here is that you're always ready to have a conversation, because the phone call came in from a number that I was unfamiliar with. I picked it up and it was a recruiter from this company called Citrix Systems. All of a sudden, my mindset and my mood had to switch and flip into interview mode. Now, I'm bringing this up because I want you to always be thinking about how you're going to react and how you're going to handle those conversations when they come in. You may be at the grocery store, you may be running errands, you may be doing housework or doing something, and all of a sudden you get a phone call, or you might be at school. I know we have a lot of students. And then all of a sudden this phone call comes in from the recruiter. Just make sure that you're practicing what you're going to say to introduce yourself, to get your mindset in the right frequency for you to be able to talk about tech. But in general, that scenario that I'm talking about at Citrix really gave me that flip of a switch moment where it's like, all right, I'm ready to have a conversation. Yes, I did apply for this job, so on and so forth, and continue the conversation. Now, the recruiter that I spoke to, and this is something that I want you all to take notes about recruiters, is some recruiters are not going to be as technically inclined as the opportunity that you're applying for. But that doesn't mean that you won't find recruiters that are really technically inclined. So be prepared to have technical conversations, even if this is the first time you're engaged with this company and you're actually speaking to a recruiter, because the recruiter I spoke to actually was a really techie person. She actually wanted me to answer some technical questions before we even were able to move on in the conversation. Now, I'm bringing this up because I know that sometimes cohort students come to me like a day before or preparing for their interview with a recruiter and not really thinking about the technical aspect, but always be ready to talk about tech. Always be ready to talk about your skill sets and what you bring to the table. Always be ready to talk about what programming languages you're most proficient at and being able to give examples of how you use them. You may not get into the real crux of the technical challenges, coding challenges, and things like that with a recruiter, but you may find yourself in conversations with them about technical things that you have to speak at a certain level for them to move you on to the next phase. Now, one thing that I did not have to do talking to Citrix in this case study is I did not have to do any type of online assessments or hacker rank or lead code exercise before moving on to the next round. The reason why I bring this up because as of late, that is a norm for most candidates to experience, having to showcase their skill sets, not only in conversations with a recruiter, but potentially on some online assessment. I'm going to quickly talk about online assessments and then we'll get back to the case study. When I think of online assessments, two things that I want you to focus on. Number one, getting to the finish line, making sure that you're submitting as much code to get to code complete as possible. And then number two, most of the online assessments are timed. So make sure that before you start the online assessment, you're ready. You're in the right environment. You're in the right mindset. You have all the tools you need available for you to be able to execute on the online assessment, and then just hammer it out and focus on it and shoot for you to be able to get code complete and done in a certain period of time. So that's what I would say about online assessments. But for my case in Citrix, it was more or less conversations about technical implementation, technical features, software that I've used in the past, and then obviously reviewing my resume. Now, the funny thing about that, when I say reviewing my resume with the recruiter at Citrix is, there was a scenario where the recruiter was talking about something on my resume and I had already forgot about it. So the tip and strategy here is make sure you keep your resume up to date and you know what resume you shipped out there so that you can have intellectual conversation about things that you have written down that you performed inside your resume. So I slipped by with, just being able to use, or actually remembering that, yeah, I did actually put that in my resume to continue the conversation. But there's been a number of candidates that I've interviewed in the past that I talk about something on the resume and they forgot that they put it on there. So make sure you read and update and keep your resume up to date and remembering what you put out there. Now, the process of actually moving forward in that conversation was just more or less getting through the technical conversation. I'm talking about the case study with Citrix, and then actually getting a chance to talk to the hiring manager. Now, one thing that I want to make sure I emphasize when you're moving on to the next level from talking to a recruiter to a hiring manager, or actually moving directly into the technical interviewing, is that same mindset is what you need to carry on with you when you go and talk to the hiring manager or the technical staff. Because one thing that you may not know is that recruiters have to write down kind of like what the conversation was about with the candidate, what areas that they felt they excelled at, and more or less just giving justification to move things forward. And you may be continuing a conversation that you had with a recruiter, with the hiring manager, potential hiring manager, or technical team. So the reason why I bring this up, because once I had a conversation with the hiring manager, they basically left right where I left off with the recruiter to continue the conversation, talking about a technology that I was working on, and more or less wanting me to continue to talk about the proficiency and getting lower into the stack, right? Or lower into the project, or lower into the process. Or let's say you're talking about a project on your resume. It's like your surface level with a recruiter, but then the hiring manager really wants to get down into the details, or the technical people want to get down into the details. So just make sure that you're always ready for that continued conversation. And in general, the conversation with the hiring manager will be different than it is with the recruiter. So just make sure you're prepared for that next level. Now, the results of actually those two phases of interviewing at Citrix favored me very well, because eventually I actually had an opportunity to come on site to actually interview with their full staff. Now, I know most of the time nowadays, everybody's doing most of their interviewing over Zoom. You may get called into the office to actually do on-site interviewing. Times may be returning back to that. So I'm bringing this up more or less just for you to also get yourself prepared for those type of conversations. One thing with Zoom is make sure that you're in the right environment, your camera's working, you have good dressed attire, and you're ready to have a conversation. And if you're going on site, make sure you're promptly there on time, dressed at the right dress code that they say in general. But ultimately, both of those scenarios require you to more or less be prepared for those type of engagements. On-site interviewing has just a little bit more, how can I say, intimidation, and from my perspective, than doing it over Zoom. So being ready to go on site may require you to put in a little bit more preparation, but in general, just be yourself, be ready to have a conversation, and use all the tools that you've learned here at CodePath with workshop sessions that we've done before, or all the things that you've learned from your peers or in the industry as a whole. So just keep that in mind when you're actually having those type of interviews and on-sites. So we're going to move on from this case study. The results was I actually did end up getting hired from Citrix. I worked there for only about a year and a half because I actually got hired by another place. But in general, that experience out the gate was something that I was, number one, wasn't really looking for an opportunity, because I was just roaming on their website and I checked out their career website. But then also, once I got the phone call from the recruiter, I had to remember that I actually even submitted a job or an application there, and then obviously continue the conversations from there. Now, some of the takeaways that I want to make sure I emphasize in terms of that case study, which was very successful in terms of just being able to get an opportunity and getting a job there, is that when I was talking to the recruiter staff over there, I made sure that I talked out my problems out loud, right? It's okay for you to be verbose in your commenting, verbose in your questioning, verbose in anything that you're saying, so that they know where and what you're thinking of, right? And what direction you're heading in. Clarifying questions. I don't know how many times I remind cohorts and students to pause some time and ask the interviewer, can you repeat that question again? Or can you repeat it in another way? Or can you give me some more clarity? Asking clarifying questions, or asking them to clarify their question in general, will allow you to really get a better view on what type of solution you're going to present. And when I say ask clarifying question, I'm using it in two different ways. One, in terms of just getting the person to ask you clarifying or getting the person to reiterate their question in a clarifying way, or you actually clarifying your question, actually like, hey, I think that the technology does XYZ. Oh, the reason why I think it does XYZ is because this, that, and this. Like, you're giving clarity for your answer and your results. So just make sure that you're being mindful that providing as much details, verbose, and clarity will definitely give the other person on the other side of the table a more insightfulness of where you're at in your journey. And another one that I have there is, it's not about, you getting to a solution, it's how you did it, right? And some of you may have seen this in other slides before, but just, it's really important for you to be mindful of, sometimes we don't care if you get the answer wrong. We just want to see how you got to the wrong answer. And if we see how you got to the wrong answer, there was an opportunity for you to go left or an opportunity to go right, and you decided to go right. Unfortunately, that wasn't the right answer, but at least we knew why and what decision points you had to consider. And then the last one I want to mention there is just interviewers or collaborators. We collaborate by nature. We don't even submit code unless we're collaborating with other engineers. When you're in an interview, just keep that in mind, that the other person on the other side of the table is very much a collaborative. So having a conversation and really just using the space to collaborate in terms of solving the challenge that's in front of you, and or in general, just having a conversation, right? Just remember, you're having a conversation, it's collaborative, all right? So we're going to move on to our second case study. This case study really revolves around the real rigor that you have to put in to showcase your skill sets as a developer. Now, this case study is a company that I applied for, and unfortunately, I did not get hired. Not similar to Citrix in terms of how they found me or how I got engaged from them, but LinkedIn by far is one of the best tools out there for recruiters to find you. And in this case study, a LinkedIn or someone from that company found me on LinkedIn and engaged me through LinkedIn. The reason why I'm bringing up LinkedIn is, number one, it's basically a treasure trove of all the companies that are out there looking for engineers. And they usually use this tool. It has become like the centralized tool for most companies for them to find candidates. So that means make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. Make sure your LinkedIn profile is at a level where they could find you in terms of search terms, keywords, showcasing your skills, so on and so forth. And I don't know if you knew this, if you still need some support with your LinkedIn profile, we offer that in the Career Center. So please come through. Kelsey, Catalina, or myself can definitely give you some feedback on your LinkedIn profile. But please make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. Another one out there that you need to make sure is up to date is GitHub, but we won't cover that too much, but LinkedIn definitely. All right, so for this case study, the company found me on LinkedIn, and I wasn't really looking for a new opportunity, but this is also another career tip, and I'm kind of giving you a little sidebar, is I like to make sure that I'm interviewing, even if I have a job, 1 to 2 times a year. So if somebody pings me, on LinkedIn, I'll say, yeah, I'll, go through the interview process just to make sure I keep my skill set sharpened, but that's a pro tip. But back to the case study. So the company reached out to me, and more or less, the first thing that the recruiter wanted to do is jump on the phone call and, introduce myself and so on and so forth, talk about my skills. After quickly getting through that phase, the next phase of the interview was actually a coding exercise. So I actually got a take-home coding exercise where I was more or less solving a problem that required you to have some in-depth understanding of cloud infrastructure, automation, and using tools like Terraform, which are like infrastructure as code platforms. But unfortunately, I never worked in that coding language before or used Terraform. I used something else. And I didn't take some of my own advice in terms of taking time to prepare for these online type of assessments. And I decided just to jump right in. That was one of the first mistakes I made. The second mistake I made was a lot of assumptions that I took into in terms of the solution that they were looking for, because I didn't really use one of my tools, which is collaborating with the hiring staff on requirements, parameters, and certain functionalities that they wanted completed in this code base or this exercise that they sent me. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning these things is that I want you to be mindful of, number one, you have to go through the process of failing sometimes for you to really heed your own lessons, and also for you to continue to develop new skills. And with me not having those skill sets specifically around the platform that they were looking for, it took me a lot longer for me to solve the challenge that they had. I didn't know that they were timing me, but that was one of the things that I did not take in consideration before I jumped into the pot per se, is how long it was going to take me to provide a solution. So I submitted the code, and it wasn't really nothing that I was proud of. It wasn't nothing that I would have submitted in production at the company I was working for at that time. And in general, at the end of that exercise, I knew that I was not going to be going to the next level or to the next phase. Because for me, as someone that was already in the industry, I knew that number one, I need to make sure I get to the finish line and get to code complete. And also the timing, it just wasn't where it was supposed to be at. So I took more advantage of the idea of like, hey, I know I'm not going to move on to the next level, but I'm going to use this as an example of a baseline for me when I'm studying and preparing for my next interview. And that's one of the key things that I'm taking away from this second case study, is that as you are iterating and putting in repetitions for interviews, I notated in there how many interviews you've attended. Make sure that you're documenting as much as you can about each of those interviews. Because the cool thing about me documenting or remembering the exercise that I had with that interview that I failed at LinkedIn, from LinkedIn, is that I interviewed for another company and they asked me the same exact problem. A little bit tweaks, a little bit different, a little bit this, but it's the same exact problem and solution that they were looking for. And because I went through that exercise of failing the first attempt, because I went through that exercise of not taking my time and really putting in preparation before I started to execute on the online assessment, I was able to successfully pass this next interview from a totally different company like this. That's the key thing that I want to make sure you all pick up in terms of strategies and tips in crushing interviews. You're going to crush interviews once you have more interviews. You're not going to get the one right out the gate. There are some of you that will, and congratulations to you. Some of you might get it in the second attempt. Congratulations to you too. Most of us, including myself, we need a few more repetitions before we get ourselves sharpened enough to be able to pass these online assessments that I'm talking about specifically, but more or less taking the past experiences for you to be able to get through the next level of the interview, right? So keep this in mind as you're interviewing throughout your life of time that you're in this field of engineering, is make sure you record this stuff, write it down, index it, and make sure you use that as a reference point before you start to interview again. All right. So the takeaways that I want to make sure that I also bring up in this conversation is that practice to become proficient. So practicing those interview questions, practicing the ones that you failed in the past, is going to make sure that you're going to be proficient when it's time for you to execute. The other thing is it's okay for you not to know the answer. Now, I didn't mention this in the case study, but in the case study itself, I mentioned that I did not know a platform. It was called Terraform. And my thing is I felt like I didn't have enough, how can I say, sorry about that. I felt like I didn't have enough courage for me to ask the company, like, hey, can I get some more details about certain things? And the reason why I'm bringing that up is I want you all to know that it's okay for you not to know the answer. It's okay for you not to know how this technology works. It's okay for us to ask you a question and then you not know, and then we ask that question at another level, and then you still not know. It's okay, because we're measuring where your proficiency is at. The next bullet is always be learning. That's where you get value from not knowing an answer, is that gives you an opportunity for you to learn even more. And when I say always be learning, if you didn't know this field of engineering, you will always have to be learning. Everything that I used to work on 5 years ago, 10 years ago is deprecated. It's gone. It doesn't even apply no more. Everything that I work on right now, I have to learn it. I have to learn something else. I have to learn this. I have to learn this new feature, this new functionality. It's always going to be a game of learning, and you're going to have to learn to love to learn, really, like really love to learn. Maybe that's what I should have pinned there, love to learn, because if you don't fall into that eagerness to always want to learn something new, you're going to get left behind. We're going to have a technology that you are going to be the subject matter expert, but we're no longer going to use it 5 years from now, and you're going to get left behind. So always be learning. And then the last line there I say in terms of a takeaway is code, and code more. The thing about coding is for you to be as proficient as you would like to be, especially when you're showcasing your skills during online assessments or on a whiteboard or in an actual live coding session with another engineer, is that you have to code more so that you can feel comfortable coding. If you don't code, it's going to be like, I don't know what next. That's what you don't want to happen during an interview, right? So for you to get over that, you're going to have to continue to code. Now, where do you code? Obviously, Elite Code, Hacker Ranks are going to give you those coding challenges, but I like to recommend cohorts and students to think about contributing to an open source project out there. If you're not contributing to an open source project, write projects. I apologize. I would prefer you to contribute to open source projects than a personal project. And I'll quickly mention this why. So personal projects are really just shiny toys for you as an individual engineer, showcasing your skills. But if you're not showcasing these skills in the playground where everybody else is playing at, you're not really showcasing your engineering skills to the right group of people that are looking like myself. I'm always looking for engineers that are contributing to projects externally rather than just projects that they're doing internally. Because this is how we work. This is how you play and work at these companies on a daily basis. Everybody's collaborating on some centralized code base, and we're all submitting code into the same repository, reviewing it. Hey, no, you need to change this line, you need to change that line. But in general, those are the skill sets that if you create, or if you actually to showcase these skill sets before you get a job, you are going to be at the top of the list in terms of conversation. So if you have the opportunity to find ways to contribute to an open source project. If you have any other questions about open source project, please reach out, come through my office hours for us to have one-on-ones and general chat, but open source projects, open source projects, open source projects. That's all I want to hear and code more. All right. And we're getting down to the end of this. So in general, these tips and takeaways, which we'll send out the slide deck afterwards for you to have the tips and takeaways that I mentioned in the end of each of those case studies, is always be ready. Be ready to have conversations. Be ready to talk about tech. Be ready to talk about yourself. Be ready to talk about what coding language you enjoy, what framework you like. Talk about your project, your most recent project, or talking about an open source project you contribute to, right? Be always ready to have these conversations, and don't be afraid to apply for jobs. If you're on some website and you like their website, let me go check out their career website and see what opportunities they have, and apply, and just be ready to have a conversation. All right. And that's where we are at the end of our conversation today. So crushing the technical interview with 2 case studies and a few takeaways. Now, this is an opportunity for us to have open questions. One of the first questions is where do we access your office hour? So I just said the word office hour, and I don't have a link out for it yet. But one of the new things that I'm going to do is, actually, I take it back, not a new thing. So last quarter, end of last year, we were running an exercise where I was doing some leak code study groups. And basically for that 45 minutes to an hour, I was just hanging out in the Zoom. If anybody wanted to come and practice some leak code questions with me, I was there available. And if nobody came through, I was actually going to just record it and send out some videos of me, solving some leak code questions. That same space is something that I want to continue to have. It's just going to be an hour, 45-minute or hour a week, and anyone can just come through rather than have to wait and get on my calendar. And we'll broadcast that out a little bit more, either through a newsletter or maybe even a follow-up conversation from this Zoom call here. But I'll make sure I publish that out for you all to have access to it. All right. And next one says, I would love to have that if you could continue with it. Oh, I believe Edward's talking about the leak code study group. I was there. We ran at least 3 to 4 sessions. We didn't have that many attendees. That's why we stopped it, but we could definitely bring it back if you all are interested. Mention it inside inside the Slack room, or send me a DM directly, and then I would definitely love to host those again. All right. Any other questions? Anybody wants to come up on stage, turn on their camera, open their mic, and ask a question? Is this session recorded? Yes, it is. Go ahead, you're up. Mr. Yeah, there we go.
Hi, hear me?
Yes, I can. How's it going?
All right, yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you for hosting this meeting of us.
For sure.
Yeah, so one question is like, how do you feel about balancing preparing for technical interviews and getting more upskilling experience because I know like kind of grinding leak code leaves out potential time to participate in open source projects or make your own project. So like a kind of like my dilemma is like I don't want to just grind out leak code questions and then when I look at my resume, there's like nothing there in terms of projects.
For sure. So the thing that I unfortunately have an issue with our industry is that the entry point into our field has this idea that lead code is the only pathway forward, or you have to go through lead code, and these type of algorithm data structure questions are the ways that you showcase your skill sets. I have an opposite of feeling of that, where I feel that your contributions on projects as an engineer is showcasing an engineer skill set, not just someone who's able to solve those problems. But unfortunately, you have to go through that ringer of type of questions and be prepared for it. What I recommend students is make sure that you're building proficiency, and repetition is going to build proficiency. You're going to get to a point where you're going to start to get these leak code questions, the HackerRank questions, and they're all going to start looking the same. And it's just, hey, oh yeah, that's just this algorithm that I have to use. Oh yeah, I just use this type of manipulation with list. Once you start to get to that level, that means you're checked. You have that skill set. You should move on from that, and you shouldn't be continuing to grind those same type of leak code questions. Once you get to a feeling where you are able to look at a question, really kind of diagnose it, drop some code, pass all the tests, by that time, you should already be focusing on projects, real projects, projects that's going to showcase your skill sets, not just solving these leak code problems. Because if you think about it, when I go to your GitHub page, am I looking at the answers that you created from leak code? No, I'm looking at projects that you worked on or communities that you're associated with. And the reason why I mention open source and communities as such is that a lot of you don't know that companies hire from contributions from GitHub. I was an engineer that hired two people from GitHub because they were committing to code that we were working on at Twitter. That's why I'm like, hey, if there is a place where I can go showcase that I can really ball, like I just gotta make a few shots and they can see it, and then the recruiters on the sideline, like that's where you want to be playing at, and that's why I always recommend using those avenues rather than chumming at leak code for months on end. Yes, you have to keep that knife sharpened because unfortunately that's how you get into this industry here. But I wouldn't say that you're going to spend your whole time doing that. Maybe even just limiting yourself in some form or fashion. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yep.
Bobby, was it?
Yes, sir. Bobby Dorless.
All right,
And you
nice to
choose
meet
the
you.
next person. You see their hands raised. You choose the next person. I didn't see who came up first. No, no, no. All right. How about Edwin? I don't know which of the two came up first.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I had like a little bit of a specific question, obviously, because it's like targeted towards me. But like, so just to give you a background, I'm about to graduate this May, right? I am currently in an internship that I worked for 7 months, and the internship is like it is software based, but I'm the only software developer. There's no, managers, there's no teams or anything. It's just me working on a project for 7 months, and it's based on Excel VBA, so it's Visual Basic Applications, right? And I'm about to graduate. I don't think they're going to give me a good offer. I'm a little worried about, what's going to happen in the future. I've been, job hunting for a little bit, but I'm also still working with them part time while also being in school. And my question is like, how should I really target? Because for me, it's not really an issue getting to the behavioral interview process. I feel like my resume is pretty nice, but and also my LinkedIn because I do show off my projects through school and CodePath and stuff like that. But my question is like, should I, because I'm also thinking of like not gonna stop working with them just so I can have the time to actually, grind out those late code questions because I feel like that's the thing I'm mostly scared of. Just because I had a really, really bad first experience, and after that, like it has been haunting me ever since. But I do want to get better through not through LinkedIn, sorry, through like behavioral, not behavioral, technical interviews.
Mhm.
I actually there was a class in Colpa actually that offered technical interview prep, which I'm also like I was an observer at that time, so I'm actually rewatching those. But like again, I haven't really had the time to like practice those again. But like my question is like, what do you well first what do you think will be like my best path in towards like trying to achieve a reasonable goal in terms of what I want to do? I mean, I know this is this is a my question, not necessarily your question. But I just wanted to see your opinion about what would you do in my scenario. And the second
Yeah,
question, oh sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
The last question I had is like, how did you specialize in your field? Because I know, like, you know, like at least for my major, I'm in computer science, and I've been doing a little bit of everything, especially with CodePath. I'm actually going to be doing their web development. SEO background. I did Android development, cybersecurity, and technical interview, at least a little bit. And I didn't actually finish it completely, but I'm also going to be doing web development this semester after I finish their pre-registered assessment. However, I do want to like I want to be specialized in something, but I don't. I guess you could say like I'm not sure if I want to specialize in one thing because I do like different things. So first of all, I'm thinking either Android development, cybersecurity, and web development. Those are like the big three I'm interested in. But like I want to see your opinion about like what should I do?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Let me first answer the first
Yeah.
question. One of the things that I find extremely challenging for new people getting into our industry is being able to show their work.
Mhm.
And that's usually because they're either in a college and they don't work in the open source realm, or they work in a company that everything is proprietary and they can't publish it out. Those are going to be challenges that you're going to really find external projects to contribute to showcase your skill sets. And the tough thing that you're dealing with is that you're working for a company that number one, if you're the only developer, it's an environment that I would not recommend anyone to commit time to, especially if you're new to this industry, because you're not getting the right feedback in terms of how you're developing your code, architecting certain solutions, and in general, it's usually a collective mindset in terms of how you manage software in an effective way, right?
Yeah.
If I'm an individual just doing it myself, it's really going to be how quickly can I get past the errors that I'm having, and I'm able to get the ticket that I have assigned fixed, right? And there's
Yep.
really no second party collective mind giving you better ideas on your solution. So that environment in terms of your mindset, hey, that might not be the best environment for you, is the same feeling that I have when you were describing it to me. Now, how are you going to find ways to showcase your work? If it's proprietary, you're going to be breaking NDA and stuff like that to publish whatever you've done. So you have to find ways of working externally. Externally is a great way is through open source projects, and in finding something similar to maybe something that you're working on. Or if the company's okay with it, finding ways to publish your code internally, externally inside of GitHub so that other people can contribute and give you some feedback to it. So that would be kind of like what my number one strategy would be for your first question is number one, I don't like working in environments where I'm the only developer. Number two, I like to work in environments where I can show the world my work, not just only inside the vault behind this company. And then number three, you want to make sure that you're contributing to things that you can get more feedback from other engineers that are going to make you better. That's how your knives get sharpened.
Yep.
Now, in terms of lead code and the challenges that you had with your first interview, I'm sorry that you had a terrible encounter. Just know that it happens to us all. I'm scarred also, and some questions that people ask me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember this happened before. But in general, the way that you reduce that anxiety is by practicing, right? Not practicing to make it perfect, but become proficient. And you are right, increasing your lead code frequency of, sharpening that skill. But remember, I'm not one of those that says that's the only way you get into the industry. That's more or less just sharpening the skill just for you to get through the door. But truly, the skill set that you want to showcase is being a software engineer and some type of project externally, or if you don't have, some personal project, so that you can at least get your foundation there. Now, on to your second question. In terms of my background and getting into computers as a whole, I have a really crazy story that may not even follow any of you all paths now, because I didn't even go to college at all. I only have 2 years of technical school, and then I use certifications to get into the industry. I started off more on the systems administration side of the house. So this is managing computers, to becoming a systems engineer, managing large scale systems, to becoming like a site reliability engineer, where I'm managing all of the computer systems of a website. And what happened is that as you're starting to develop these skills, from systems admin, systems engineer, up to a site reliability engineer, to like an architect type thing, you eventually start to pick up new skills. Or what in my case, I needed to become a software engineer because there's just too many computers out there for me to manage. That's how I started to pick up different type of skill sets and starting to add not just to my main line that I'm focused on, which is systems engineering, but complementary skill sets that have really become foundational to my ability to be an effective engineer across the board. So it's not that I'm just a systems engineer for, managing operating systems and systems at scale, but I'm also a database engineer. I can manage databases from NoSQL to SQL, from caching systems. I can manage network infrastructure from core switches to routers to fiber optic. Like, there are so many things that you're going to be exposed to. Don't just narrow your focus only in one lane. Allow those other complementary skill sets to come aboard, because eventually what you'll see is that those skill sets themselves are going to make you more marketable. Because imagine if you and I went to interview and you're only a systems engineer and I'm a systems engineer, but I'm also a software engineer. Guess what? I got one leg up on you, right? Those are the things that you'll start to see as you're developing these skills over the years. But just make sure that you keep your eyes open, keep your mind open. You might find something else that you're more interested in, or you might find a new coding language that you like. But in general, you have to continue to learn. As long as you keep learning, you'll be able to maintain in this field of engineering. Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh yeah, that answered my question. Thank you. Oh wait, one last. This will probably combine one question and the message, while mine as well. Do you have any certification recommendations as well as any open source recommendations? There's somebody in the chat who also asked that.
Yeah, so certifications wise, for me personally, I don't give advice on like, hey, go get this certification and you're going to get a job. I like to say, hey, if this is your field, let's say cybersecurity, what is the best certification for that field? Security Plus is like one of the first ones. The highest one is like CISSP type stuff. Or let's say for systems engineering, it's like, hey, learning Microsoft operating systems or getting into Linux and learning the Linux at the highest level is more or less finding the lane that you want to be in and finding what the highest certification is and what is the lowest certification and start working your way towards it. That would be my recommendation. And in terms of open source projects and open source recommendations, this is a very difficult question to answer because I can't tell you go work on that project, because you have to be passionate about the project that you're going to work on. Now, the key thing to remember is that this is going to be something you're going to be doing at your free time. If I tell you that you have to go work on that project, I don't want to go do this while I'm on my free time. But if you chose the project and it's something that you're passionate about, I guarantee you'll be looking for more free time to go work on that project. Don't be mindful of like, hey, it has to be this big old project that everybody knows. It can be a small little framework, a small little library. It could be even a library that you use all the time. You'll be surprised how many bugs are open for a library that you use all the time. So I'll think of one like the request library for Python. If you go to GitHub, look up the source for the request library. I guarantee you that project has open tickets, basically problems that need to be solved, new features that you can go write code for, documentation that you can contribute to, or even just collaborating with that community. And that's the key thing that I want to say is collaborating with that community. That's how you contribute to open source. But I can't tell you a project. It has to be something that you're interested in. And you'll be surprised. Look at some of the libraries that you use or tools that you use all the time. There definitely is going to be an open source repository that you can contribute to.
Okay, thank you.
Roger that. Next person with their hand up.
Hey, Bobby. Thank you so much for today. My name is Jason, and I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you.
So, I'm pretty much in the similar situation with like Edwin. Like I'm a grad student, I'm a master's student, like graduating in May, and I've been working for a company, like a startup, like Series A startup, like since last year May, part time, like along with my coursework and research. So my issue is like I've been holding like that part-time job, and also like I've been working as a TA for graduate level databases courses and research, like for my graduation thesis. So for my TA work and graduation thesis is basically like I'm basically part of the lab and do the work. So like I'm trying to basically like make some services, and I'm gonna like try to publish paper out of it. So in this case, I'm not authorized to share my project code or something to my personal GitHub or something, right? And also being a head TA like of this course, this is databases course, like basically publishing full stack web app. even if I know the content, being a TA for a 2 year, I cannot really publish like in a solution or something because like that's violation of the academic honesty rule, right? So this, I guess that this is because this is happening because of academic dishonesty rule, prevention rule, like set up by my school and lab. In this case, even though I'm spending a majority amount of time for project and then my TA commitment, I have a difficulty of actually showing my like commitment and project progress to someone else like recruiter or something like that. I'm definitely try to work on like lead code or something like, basically like by buying more time until I graduate. But do you have any recommendation in someone like in my case who are mostly working on like school project and school like a research project who's trying to work on thesis publication or something?
Yeah, this is really difficult to find ways to showcase what you're capable of doing. And that's what it basically comes down to, is that you're spending a lot of time contributing to projects internally to your school education wise, and then you can't showcase your work. Unfortunately, on the other side, if I'm on the outside, how do I get to evaluate you as an engineer? I have to see something. I need to see some products. The things that I've always tried to emphasize with people that are in academics is you may not be able to showcase your work in terms of details, but the output, you said a research project. Once that research is published, I need on a blog post. I need you to write articles about it. I need you to showcase like what those details that you can talk about in some type of public forum. So I've had a student work on a project. I believe it was, it might have been for Duke. And unfortunately, she wasn't able to showcase her actual work, like the core coding language and code itself. But what they allowed her to do is for her to publish a blog post on Duke's website. So now that she actually completed the project, published the work, now she had that as a reference point for us in terms of someone from externally to go and look at as much details as they allowed her to publish through a blog post, but it was officially through her school. That right there was a medium that got her recognized because we were able to see the work from that lens, from that light. If you can't showcase your work, then there's really limited ways for us to make that evaluation. Now, you can contribute to open source projects, but you already got like 5 things on your plate. I mean, like, how are you going to work on another open source project? It is a medium, it is a way, but that's the way that you get your work or show your ability externally, right? And then working with your education or working with your institute to see if there's a way for you to let your work be seen. That would be an avenue that I would pursue. Or like you're saying, it's like lead code it up, but that's just going to get you like ready for algorithms and data structure, not really project work with that solids type stuff that you want. So I would pursue something where you're talking to your institute and be like, hey, this is a barrier for me to showcase my skill sets. Is there any type of medium that's available for me to publish progress as I'm going? Any type of code that we could, scrub out and take out and just only publish this function. I mean, making code sometimes more modular. I don't know if you've ever seen code bases where you kind of have a restricted repository and then a public repository, but you're both kind of working in the same repository. That's a way for you to be able to showcase some of your work. But in general, it's definitely something that's going to limit you. And I don't have nothing other than saying, hey, go find another project to work on to add to your list, or getting your school or institute to let you publish some of this stuff.
Right. Thank you so much.
For sure, for sure. Next person with the hands up. Actually, let me read one question first. We have one. It says, after initial interview, how long should I expect to wait for a response from HR? And what point should I move on? Ooh, that's a really good question. So we have a question in the chat. And that question really revolves around how long do you wait? Now, my thing is that whenever I submit an application or apply for a position, I automatically already move on. I'm moving on to the next opportunity, moving on to the next job listing, and just more or less just trying to get as much opportunity to put my resume in front of people. Now, if HR calls me and, it sounds like the conversation went really well, and we're ready to move things forward, I personally would have one follow-up afterwards. It's like send them an email like, hey, I know it's been at least this long time between our last conversation. Is there anything that I can help you, decide on moving our conversation forward, blah, 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 blah. If you get ghosted, it's okay. Just move on. technically that might be some way for them to say, hey, we're not able to move on. Their follow-up process and procedures are not really in place. They're not really, how can I say, they're not really honoring the conversation that you initially have if they're not following up. And I would just say move on. Now, I'm not saying move on and forget about them, because they may come back in 2-3 weeks and be like, hey, do you remember our conversation? Or like, oh, thank you for remembering me, kind of stuff. But I will not allow that to hold you back from moving on and continuing to look for other opportunities. But yeah, if they're ghosting you or you're not getting a response from them, that might be their way of saying, hey, we can't move things forward. Or they just may be backed up, because sometimes when recruiters are contacting, you're contacting maybe 20 people, and then you may have slipped through the crack or something like that. But I would at least give them one follow-up email, and if not, then just keep moving forward. I'm sorry to hear that you're going through that. All right, person with their hand raised. Unfortunately, let me see. Yes, I can't pronounce your name. It's Yuqin. Yellow. Your mic is muted.
Oh, thank you for reminding.
No worries.
Thank you so much for sharing those useful advices. And I have one quick question: is how to prepare for the tech questions during the interview? Because I have a situation that I interview with a company. The last round, I solved all the leak code pretty good, and I was asked some tech questions. Those are like tiny things, like what's the difference between the varlet and const in JavaScript? And I just cannot remember the var because I seldomly use that. Yes, and during my whole learning process, I learn everything by doing. So I might not remember those details very well. So I want to ask for your advice, like how to prepare for those tech questions.
Yeah, this is something that we're all going to go through in terms of conversations about tech, right? And what I really want to emphasize is that it's a conversation. So whenever I'm talking to you about maybe a technology that I want you to give me a comparison of, or I want you to kind of give me some detail of, is really conversation based, right? Either you're going to know something about it or you're not going to know something about it. If you don't know something about it, be okay with saying, I don't know, or I don't remember, I don't recall, right? But I usually like to follow up with, in the case that you were talking about, maybe 2 different ways of doing things and maybe a preferred way and an old way of doing it, is to be like, hey, I may not remember, or I may not know how the old way used to be. But let me tell you how I would use this thing, that thing to solve the same type of problem. Continuing the conversation is what I'm really letting you know, right? It's not like A, B, or C, and you choose A, B. No. I want us to have a conversation and talk about it. And your conversation could start off with is, hey, I've never used that technology before. Can you give me some more details or give me some more clarity on how it's used, right? That's like me and you having a conversation back and forth. And that really just opens up the floor for us to be able to see what other things you may say that, oh yeah, she does know what she's talking about. She just haven't used this library before. She hasn't used this function before. She hasn't used this software before. So just keep that in mind when you get into a situation where you don't know the answer. Just remember it's a conversation. Now, how do you keep this knife sharpened? Because technology changes all the time and there's always new things coming up. There's always old things coming up. Is you have to make sure that, and this is why when I talk to cohorts, they're usually talking about leak code. I'm like, no, leak code is not even all of it. You got to go find out, surf the internet, read blog posts, watch YouTube videos, like be engulfed in this community, be engulfed in the Java. Like, I know that Java releases features lists of what they're about to release in the next version of Java. Go and read that. Go and read like backlogs on why this feature didn't work or what new features they're working on. And in general, what I'm proposing for you to do is just find your way consuming stuff in this industry outside of just doing leak code or just solving these problems or even just working on open source project. Is just go and read, just go and surf the net. And before you know it, you may stumble upon an article somebody wrote 5 years ago about why they switched these libraries up or they're using this versus the other. And then guess what? That gets indexed, right? And what I'm really getting down to is that there is no silver bullet for you to be able to answer every technical question. It's just how much have you done research and just engulfed yourself in this industry to be able to talk about just about anything. And that's where you're going to really get some more value out of it. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Very helpful. Thank you very much.
For sure, for sure. All right, so we are at time. I want to say thank you all for spending this evening, if it's evening or afternoon, if you're somewhere on the West Coast, with me, Coach Bobby D. I don't have any other slide to show other than the Career Center. This is the Career Center staff. We're here to support you. We're here to provide all the resources that we have available to us. Please feel free to always reach out to us if you have any career advice. You have an interview lined up and you need one or two more, prep questions answered, or any type of situation you need available. We're here to support you. And I want to say thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate you. Yeah. And also note, afterwards, this recording will be sent over, and I believe the slide deck also will be sent over. So thank you all so much. Y'all have a great, great evening.